Afternoon and welcome to session 8. This is our last one live, but I'm hoping that we'll still be doing one-on-ones, and I'm going to set up a group that we can all share what we've been working on and keep things going. We're going on the most ambitious thing we've done. For 7 weeks, you've been what I would call a runner. You run an agent, given a memory, you've connected it to the world, you've taught it to work on a timer, but today you're going to become a builder, and we're going to build a real application together, and it's going to be a mission control dashboard for your agent. And the headline I want you to hold from the very start is that you will not write a single line of code, not one. You will be doing the thing that actually matters, and you'll be getting the machine to do the typing for you. A quick scene set. By now you should have an agent that knows you, remembers across sessions, reaches into your calendar and your notes, and from last week, one command that you wrote, maybe a job on a timer. Hold those in mind, because every one of them is going to be what I call a different rung on the whole ladder as we climb to the top. So last week, Richard said something quite interesting when he was working with his agent, and he was talking about his co-create idea. And he said, after a lot of conversations, he said, we had lots of back and forth, but then in the end, I didn't know really what it was I've created. And he asked, like, is it a skill? Is it a command? What is it? And that's right, the right question, because essentially each one of those is a different rung on the ladder. So you start out with a conversation, and then once you start getting the hang of that, then you move up towards doing some commands. You move up then towards doing skills. And then there's one more rung, which I feel is the top of the ladder, and that is basically building your own app. And then you'll start out with what's called creating a product requirements document. And I mentioned that to Richard last week. I want to give a little bit of background, because throughout 2025, and I think the early parts of 2026, the whole AI scene has progressed very, very rapidly. And the pace at which these models have been able to build applications has actually been, it's been astonishing. These LLMs are now brilliant at building applications. And previously that would have taken months to build something like that. And I'm talking specifically about the coding aspect of it. They are incredibly good at doing the coding, but that's the critical part. It has no idea what you want. It has no memory of your intent. So your value doesn't disappear. It's just moved, and it's moved to basically the front of this whole process. And that's kind of deciding what to build and describing it and knowing clearly when it's done. That's the sort of thing that you're very good at, and that's where you come in. So I wouldn't say it's been the consolation prize. You are the good bit. Here's why I believe that's the good bit. And this one's for Richard and Mandy in particular with your creative agency, because deciding what to build is the creative act. And that's the one thing AI genuinely can't do for you. Well, it can, but here's the trap. So ask a model, what should I build? And it'll give you a brilliant and confident answer. And the problem is, so will 1,000 other people who asked it in exactly the same way. There's a lovely article that I read literally a couple of days ago. And this guy, he had this brainstorming, and he had this fantastic startup idea. And so he spoke to Claude and said, this is the perfect idea, gave him the name, the logo. Then he went online and he found a total stranger had built basically the exact same thing. In fact, the same logo. And it wasn't copied. He had just essentially asked the median answer. And the way he put it, he said, you think you're in a relationship, but you're actually in a distribution. You'll recall I really talk a lot about this guy, Andrej Karpathy, and he's one of the original founders of OpenAI. And in fact, he's now moved to Anthropic, and he's brilliant. And he did this very interesting podcast where he was talking about these large language models. And he describes the terminology he uses is the models have collapsed. And he says, you ask for a joke and it's only really got about 3 jokes. He said, when you ask it, it basically gives you the center of a distribution. And so this average idea, but of course it's very beautifully written, and the average idea is really worth nothing, because everyone you're competing against is being given the same average idea. This whole process, I think, is really, really important. Today, and honestly, for the rest of your working life when you're working with these AI agents, don't outsource the deciding. Don't walk up empty-handed and ask it to do your thinking for you. You'll get the consensus. So the idea is walk up with your own point of view, your own taste, your own ideas, and then let AI do the stress testing and stress those ideas. And that's what you need to do. You need to basically go in and give it your ideas, brainstorm, stretch, and that's the way I like to use AI, is I have my own ideas, and then I ask it to come up with a number of variations of that. And it takes my thinking and it almost extends my thinking. And I think that's really, really important. And although we're talking about just building an app, you've got to say, like, well, what is my app in the first place? And that's the starting point. So that's where I think you need to use AI a little bit more carefully in terms of the whole idea creation side of the process. And as I said, Mandy and Richard, I think you are in that exact space.
Certainly are.
And use AI in the right way, but your value, I think, really goes up rather than being outsourced to AI in this respect.
So, Kevin, just one thing to strengthen that. I heard this and I've tested it with different AI models, but if you ask Claude or anybody else to pick a number between 0 and 10, and you can test it now, it will pick 7.
Why 7?
It's the way AI sort of thinks, because they try to reason the number, and 7 is sort of in the middle between 5 and 10, and it feels more random because it's not a random generator. It sort of thinks about it. You need to still think for AI sometimes. My theory on that is it leads to groupthink. Everybody put in lazy comments into Claude or whatever is going to get the same answer.
All right, Morris, I'm going to call you on that.
But number between 0 and 10.
It sounds like a nice blog, Rich, first.
Pick a number between 0 and 10.
What should be 2?
7. Boom, boom.
Wow.
That is amazing. That is absolutely amazing. So, point made. Thank you very much, Morris. Coming back to the idea about building the software. Before we build, I need to give you kind of a map. When we go through these videos, it's not just kind of a blur of stuff happening. So I'm trying to give you this mental map of where we're going. There's only one set of activities in software development, and it's 7 steps. Every bit of jargon or methodology that you've heard of is really just a different variation of these 7 steps. And so the 7 steps are idea, then requirements gathering, then you move on to design, then you move on to the build, then you test it, then you deploy it, and then you maintain it. So those are the steps that you go through in software development. And let me explain a little bit about each of those. So obviously, idea is then deciding what to do and why in the first place. The requirements is writing down what it must do. The design is sketching out how all of the different pieces fit together, and there's a few different elements to design. One is kind of more architectural IT elements to it, but other elements of design are the ones, Mandy and Richard, you would think about in terms of designing what the front ends look like and the taste aspect of it. And then the build is the actual making of it. And then the testing is checking all of that code. Deploy is basically putting it out into the world and making it available. And maintain is then just looking after it, and pretty much that's the lot. You'll hear lots of methodology words like waterfall or agile or scrum, and as I said, you don't need to worry about any of those. Those methodologies are really just those 7 steps, but they just choose a slightly different order. They choose a slightly different, what I would call a batch size. And then the other aspect is like how much of the plan do you allow to change during the whole process. That's really all those different methodologies do. They do the same thing, but just in those different variations. Remember, you're directing your agent. You need to make sure that you're giving very clear directions, and that means having a good product requirements document, or there's another terminology which gets used, and that's called a specification or a spec for short. And the thing when you're working with an agent is you need to write a very clear spec and let the agent build against that spec. So it builds, checks against that spec, and then repeat. So you're going to go around in that loop, and those are the steps that you're going to follow. And the idea, requirements gathering, and design, those are the steps that you're very good at. So steps 1, 2, and 3. And that's where we're coming in. That's where I talked about front loading all of that. Once you've done all of those pieces and you've got your idea, you've figured out what it is you want to do, you've maybe used some AI to help stretch the idea a little bit and push you in different directions, then you get to the part that your agent is good at, which is then the second phase of it, which is the build, the test, and deploy, and then obviously the maintain as well. A split between steps 1 to 3, and then the remaining 4 steps which your agent is very good at. So coming back to this one last idea, and this one is a simple one. You need to have a very big vision of what your finished thing looks like. So I want you in these first stages to really think big. But you also, when you get to the build stage, I want you to build the smallest version of that thing that genuinely works. And there's a terminology for this, and it's called the minimum viable product. But be careful about this. If you try and build too much, you'll end up building essentially a worse version of everything rather than a complete version of one small thing. Sometimes this analogy gets used. You kind of want a scooter to get you from A to B, not a broken car. Build something really small that works and does the job. And here's the subtle bit, that the big vision is necessary at this first stage, and there's a reason for that, because it's going to drive a number of critical decisions that are going to be very, very difficult to change late on in the process. So that's why I want you to think big in your vision, because it's going to help you shape some decisions on, when we come to the design piece of it, the architecture, how it all hangs together. If you start building in a certain direction with a very, very small thing, and then later on you're going to have to reverse that decision, sometimes that can cost you a lot in terms of the whole process. So that's why I want you to think big in your initial vision. So this is me at the start of my build. It's really just getting the first scaffolding ready. So it's almost these first stages. We're not going to code yet. We're just going to get some of these basic things up and running to get us started. A few weeks back, when you were first setting up your agent, I was being a bit pedantic about asking you to make a projects folder and set your agent up inside it. Then I asked you to spend some time figuring out a proper structure for all of your agent conversations using Para or whatever methodology you felt best supported your life. And most of you are probably wondering why the layout and structure was so important. Well, today you'll see why having a proper organized folder structure is so important. We now have an agent with whom we've been having regular conversations for the past 7 weeks, and we've accumulated quite a lot of really useful information. And whilst Obsidian is a quick and easy way of getting to this information, it's still somewhat limited and a bit one-dimensional in my view. As humans, we're inherently visual, and for this reason, I prefer to have a more visual mechanism for seeing my agent's activities, and therefore we're going to build a mission control dashboard, a single screen that's the cockpit for your agent, and we're going to build it right alongside everything the agent already knows. In a previous project, I was using an agent called OpenClaw, and this agent was built by a guy called Peter Steinberger, and is very comprehensive with loads of functionality. At some point, around 3 or 4 months back, Anthropic stopped allowing OpenClaw to be run on your subscription account, and I was also finding this functionality was a bit overwhelming to the point that I did not fully understand all of the moving parts, and that triggered me to build my own agent, which is the basis for everything that you've all now learned. Anyway, with that context, I wanted to show you the mission control dashboard I built for OpenClaw, which gave me an overview of everything my agent was supporting with me all on one screen. And here it is. 14 panels, a lot of stuff on here. And we're not building all of that today, because I think what you need to do is you need to understand the big picture, but we only need to build the smallest useful slice. And today we're going to focus on just 3 panels. As I say, this original version had lots of stuff about my memory.md, my daily notes, which you'll see is part of what we'll build today, my cron jobs, which is all my stuff which is on a timer, my to-do list, my projects, people, all the people that my agent needs to know about, and of course my sole user and tools.md, and the equivalent of claude.md, which is my agents.md. And of course I've got lots of individual applications, and this was a way of seeing where all of these applications are and what they're about and whether they're all still up and running. So that's a big overview of the big picture. Now I'm going to come back to the part where all of this lives, because this is important for one of our later steps. The rule is simple. Build it in the same repo or repository as your note, the one that's already been pushed to GitHub. And the reason it becomes clear when we put it online, the host or the place that's going to be hosting our application builds from one repo. So your data has to be sitting right there alongside and inside that same repo. For most of you, that's dead easy. Your vault lives inside your agent's project, so the dashboard just goes in that same agent project. So if you put your agent in Bob, well, then it sits inside that Bob project, right alongside it. Mine's set up a little bit differently because I keep my notes in their own separate repo. So for me, it goes inside of that. The same rule either way, dashboard and data together in one repo. So if I come back to my screen here and I open my agent, I'm going to ask to do the following. Create a folder called Mission Control inside of my Life Vault. the repo that holds my daily notes, scratch, and briefs. Just the empty folder for now. We'll decide later what goes in it together. You see it's making that directory, done, created that, and it's empty for now. And of course it's saying won't track an empty directory, but of course we're going to start filling that up in a moment, so it won't be empty for very long. So we've now created the basic structure, and now we can move on to the task of deciding what goes inside of that structure that we've just created. And we're going to do that using words. We're not going to be using code. That was our first video, and it was just creating that very first folder so that we can start putting code inside of that folder. And as I said, that folder needs to be in a very particular place, same place as your agent repo. So now we'll go on to the next step. Before anyone's agent writes a line of code, we need to write down what we actually want. Grand name for it is a spec or a specification, or we've also talked about a PRD or product requirements document. Simple thing, what is it? Who's it for? What must it do? And just as importantly, what it won't do. I'm not going to type it. I'm going to tell my agent what I want, and we're going to draft it together. So if I come back to my agent and give him this prompt, draft me a one-page spec, a PRD, for a small personal mission control dashboard. It's for me, the smallest useful version, one web page with 3 panels. Number 1, recent activity, my agent's friendly daily summaries. Today, what's on, my current to-dos, and daily briefs, my recent daily brief. No login, no database, no settings, just shows me these 3 things. Write down clearly what it must do and what it deliberately won't do yet. Keep it to 1 page. Some of you may have a more comprehensive PRD, but because we're trying to do this idea of a small one and build on it, we're going to do a very simple PRD in this particular case. That didn't take very long, naturally. LifeVault Mission Control PRD, so it's now put it into that folder that we created, 1 page, scope to the smallest useful version, and key things are pinned down by checking the vault so the spec points at real data. So recent activity, it's identified our folder daily, which of course we know is set with the year, the month, and the day. What's on, so open items under do this week, it knows to look into my scratch.md, and I've got a folder of daily briefs, which is all of my research for my tailored daily brief of news items tailored to my special interests, and it knows those are stored under daily briefs. That's great. Make it deliberately blunt about the won't to-do list. No login, no database, no settings, no editing. So that's good. It looks like it's stuck to that task, and that's really, really good. And now let's go and have a look at that right now from my Obsidian Vault. Here's our PRD in our folder Mission Control. What is it? Very nice succinct summary. Why? That's good. These things already exist in the vault as markdown, but live in different folders. I have to go hunting. 1 page that surfaces and turns to go and look into already on screen. And the 3 panels, must do, deliberately not doing, and very importantly, when is it done, which we'll come on to a bit later. And of course, it has a couple of open questions, which we will also address later on. That is our single page PRD. Now, on to design. Most decisions you can change later cheaply. The colors, the layout, so don't agonize, just pick something. But 1 or 2 are what I call one-way doors. Painful to change once you've built them. Those you think about now, and there are 2 here. Door number 1, where data comes from and how it reads. First, this dashboard doesn't own any data. It reads what my agent already writes. My daily summaries, my to-do list, my daily briefs, they're all just markdown files in my vault. So the dashboard's job is simply to read those files and show them nicely, visually. Decide that now, and everything else stays simple. Add a panel later, it's just read another file. If I give you an example, you can see here's an example of my daily brief. It's just simply reading this daily brief file, and that's my daily brief for the 15th of June, and it's all of my stories, and that's a simple markdown file. So what we're hoping to do is essentially display this in a more visually appealing way. And it's going to be the same for my daily memories. So this is going to be just being shown in a very nice user-friendly way. And of course, my to-do list, again, is simply there, and that will just be shown in a nice user-friendly way. So that's the example of markdown files, which is going to be read and simply displayed on this new Mission Control dashboard. Door number 2 is about where it runs. Now, this is a big one. Where does it live? I could run it on my own machine, like the one I showed you, runs on my machine on the cloud, but then I can only see it at my desk, and most of you aren't going to run a server at home. So what's the alternative? Here's the thing I keep coming back to. My Vault already backs itself up to GitHub automatically every half an hour. A quiet little push that happens in the background. So the data is already in the cloud in GitHub. fresh every 30 minutes, which means I don't need a server at all. I can put this on a free hosting platform that watches the GitHub repo and rebuilds the page every time it changes. That host is called Vercel, and the natural way to build it is a framework called Next.js, which is a framework that Vercel knows extremely well. And that's perfect for all of you guys because you've already got your agent in a GitHub repo from session 5. So the deal is, push your stuff to GitHub and your dashboard redeploys itself with the latest. No server, no self-hosting, reachable on your phone. That's the decision. Cloud, Vercel, Next.js, and the only reason it's this easy is because of the GitHub habit that we already built. And here's what the small but important folder decision from earlier pays off. Vercel deploys one repo and it needs the data inside of it. Because I put this dashboard right in the same repo as my notes, there's nothing to wire up. The data is already there. The half-hourly push already carries it, and going live is just point Vercel at this repo, and if I built it off on its own, I'd be fighting to get the data into it. Keep the app next to the data it reads. That's the whole trick. Right, in that design session, we've now decided how do we want to set this up using our data from GitHub, and I made a design choice because I didn't want to faff around with self-hosting. I just turned to Vercel, and Vercel is basically a very nice platform for hosting websites, and you can get a very nice free tier with Vercel. I've probably got 3 or 4 different, maybe even 5 different websites that I already run on Vercel, in addition to the ones that I run on my self-hosted platform. But Vercel is just really nice and easy. So those were kind of the design choices in terms of the architecture that I needed to make at this particular stage. And again, don't be afraid to ask your agent about those design choices, because when it comes to hosting, it will very frequently point you to Vercel because it's one of the top choices for hosting websites that are being built using AI. We've now done our thinking. We know what we want to build. We've done our spec. We've done our design thinking. We've thought about those architectural decisions, but we need to now start moving on to the build phase. This is the part where your agent comes into play because it knows how to do all of the coding. I want to then move on to our next build phase. Now, a quick but very important point. The dashboard is only as good as the data behind it. So before I build any of these panels, I need to show you that the data exists. And you saw that on the Obsidian Vault earlier on, but I'm going to show you now in my agent. When I was creating my daily memories, the daily memories had a very technical version of what those daily memories were. And it was something that if I wanted to read it on my nice new mission control dashboard, I wanted it to be in a much more user-friendly way. Think of it as telling a friend what you did with your agent on any one particular day rather than more of an IT lingo. What I did was I created a small hook. You'll remember that the hooks that we do are those session end hooks where it creates our memories and puts them in. I've got an additional hook which writes a very small but user-friendly summary of what's happened on that particular day. I'm going to ask my agent to give me a version of that right now. So if I say show me the summary from our most recent daily log, you'll see that it should give us a nice summary version of that. And there we go. Fixed 2 silent infrastructure failures today. Pi's internal connection dropped. I had a connection drop from my Raspberry Pi, which Roger very kindly told me about. And so I had my agent go and fix that. I had to fix some credentials in Google, and I restored missing summaries using a self-healing mechanism. So that was me fixing some of these summaries to make sure that they worked correctly. That's the type of summary that it's going to create for me. And also it tells me which project areas are being affected. That's the user-friendly version of the summary that I want to be displaying for my memories. I mentioned there that there's this additional hook, so you guys don't have that version. I mentioned it when we were building our hooks that mine had some additional capabilities. So if you want this summary version, that will be in the session notes, and you can ask your agent to create a hook for you to write these summary versions for you, and you will have the same capability on your agent, so you can do that once your agent has built that additional hook for you. If I move to the next phase, we're now going into much more of the detailed build itself. Now, and only now that we've decided what and where, we're going to build the skeleton. I'm not going to fuss about the files. I want it boring and I want it working. The way I want a car to start without me knowing how the engine has been put together. I'm going to give my agent some instructions. Set up the simplest Next.js app, you can in my mission control folder. The standard starter, nothing fancy, ready to deploy to Vercel. Make sure node modules and the .next builder folder are git ignored. Then run it locally and tell me the address so I can see it in a browser. So a little bit of technical jargon there, but we don't have to use that technical jargon. I only use that because I knew the specific language that Vercel wanted to use, and so I chose that language. And again, you can have that conversation with your agent to discuss what language is best to build your app in, and we'll give you some recommendations. So it's now creating all the necessary files and folders, and it's going to bring in all the necessary repositories that it needs in order to run that code at the same time. So, and it's scaffolded. Now restoring the PRD and verifying the git ignore covers the node modules and .next, because there's certain files that we don't need to get put into Git because it's just a waste. The files that we want in Git are the ones that are going to be displayed. Okay, it's done. The standard next.js starter is running. Open it at this location. What I set up, a next.js 16 starter, and it was going to decide all of those kind of technical language considerations, and PRD is preserved and it's Vercel ready. So let's go and look at our app, shall we? And if I take that address and I come across to a browser screen, and it's basically scaffolded a template for an app that we're going to build at this site. Created all of the scaffolding that we need in order to put what we need to inside of our app. You saw there, that was basically setting up like a container for an app, but it's got all of the necessary pieces for this particular app. I'm trying to do this in a very slow and incremental way, each one step at a time. So I first want to get all the scaffolding right, and now we can actually start moving on to the real functional aspects of the app itself. So at the moment, it's like a holding pen for an app. Right, so here's the thing. And it's the opposite of clever. It's simple. One small step, run it, look at it, next step. Never 5 things at once and just hope, just watch. Let's do it now. I'm going to go to my agent and I'm going to give him the following prompt. Add a panel called Today, What's On. Read the To Do This Week section from LifeVault GTD Scratch and list the items. Then let me see it. So my agent is going to go and build that very small little increment for us. Read the current page and build the panel as a server component that reads Scratch MD directly. So what you'll notice now is it's starting to write some code, and you'll see this is the code that the agent knows how to write. If you're very interested, of course, you might want to go in and understand how that works, but for the most part, your agent will know exactly what to do. That is all now being built, not finished yet. Okay, it's obviously picked up that there's some error and is now trying to fix that. Okay, everything's consistent. Today What's On panel is live, and now we can go and see if our small little increment is working. And there we go. We now have a single page with our to-do list on it. So that has been a successful first little slice of what we want to build in our app. Now, there's one particular thing that I do want you to understand when building applications, and it's this concept of a front end and a back end. So the front end is basically the web page that you're viewing and you're reading, and the back end is the engine that's behind it. And you'll hear those being referred to the whole time. And basically your back end is where the raw data is stored, and that would typically be a database, or in our particular case we don't need a database because our GitHub is already our database, and then the web page is our front end. So I just wanted to clarify that terminology. So let's get our agent to now build our second panel, because that first one looked pretty good to me. Add a second panel, Daily Briefs, show my most recent file from LifeVault Daily Briefs, run it. You'll get the idea now that we're building in these very small increments, and each time we're just seeing that it's working, we can then add more functionality as we go. So it's having a look at the latest brief just to make sure it understands the format. Okay, it knows that it's a rich markdown with headings, bold, links, so it needs to figure out how to render that. And it's going to use React Markdown. Again, this is the technicalities that you don't need to know. It's having a look and saying what code needs to be used in order to give us the best visual display of this information. Okay, we're writing some more code, or at least our agent is writing some more code for us. and it looks like it's live. So let us go and have a look at our application. And if I refresh this, okay, so we've got our mission control, we've got our to-do list, and we've got our daily brief. So it looks like we've now managed to get that. And of course, we're going to polish it much later, but that's 2 down, and we're ready to move on to the next one. Panel 3, recent activity. So this is the one that I do care how it looks, not just what it shows. And there's a lesson from earlier. For real, I'm not going to describe the design in words and pray that it gives me that look and feel. I've got a picture of exactly what I want. If I go to that picture and open it up, I will show you. You'll recall from earlier, I'm going to use this because this is a style that I really like. And this idea that you can look at a full year and click on any one of those dates. And then if you click on any one of these dates over here, it'll bring up the latest information in this panel here. So I want to make sure that my agent is able to build in accordance with that design. I'm going to give the following prompt. I'm also going to take my image and I'm going to paste my image alongside it. So build the recent activity panel as a daily notes view styled like the screenshot, a year in pixels heat map, a clickable monthly calendar with today highlighted, and a pane showing the selected day's note. Read the notes from LifeVault daily, build a first pass and let me see it. We'll polish it against the picture in a minute. You should really get accustomed to this idea is your agent can read images just as well. So anytime you wanted to do something in a particular way visually, the best way is to try and get some sort of picture and drop that in so that it knows to follow that. Okay, so that is now being completed. Clean compile, no errors. Recent activity panel is live at the top of this page here. So we can go and have a look. And first part built and functional, heat map, monthly calendar, note pane. Okay, and there's of course some gaps, but I was expecting that there would be a few gaps because this is still our very first pass. So if we go over to our page right now, and we can see that our mission control activity is right here. So that in my mind looks pretty good. And there we go. I've got my summary. I can click on any one of those dates and I can go back and click on any one of these dates up top here. So that looks like a pretty good attempt. It's giving me some nice summary statistics, total notes, active days, largest note, some really useful information, which of course my Obsidian Vault does not give me. So I think that's a pretty good first pass. Not perfect, but we'll polish it later. So notice that I kept running it. Smallest thing, see it work, grow it. And notice the difference in that last one where I cared about the look. I handed it a picture, not a paragraph. Words for behavior, picture for taste. Okay, so that was the build process, and you notice I kind of went in those very, very small increments, and I think Nathan was speaking with you as well. The idea is start nice and small because you can get to understand your app, you get to see how it works, and then you can add those little polishes and you can add to the increments later. But of course, remember, we did start with that big vision at the very beginning, so we know ultimately what we want it to look like, but we're now just going to build it in those little small increments. We're going to move on to the next phase. So now we've done the basic build and we want to just do a little bit more. So now on to defining done and testing. You'll probably never want to write a test or learn the names of the different types of testing that coders actually do. But when it comes to testing, there's one thing that is my job to do, and that is to say in plain words what done and good actually looks like. Then the agent takes that and turns that into those technical checks and the tests that it can indeed run. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give my agent the following prompt, and here's my done checklist for the dashboard. All 3 panels show real data from my vault. The page loads without errors. If a source file is missing, the panel says nothing yet instead of crashing. Turn that into checks, run them, and tell me what passes. I just describe in plain English the things that I would expect to happen. My agent is then going to do all of the plumbing to run a set of tests. And of course, these tests can be tests when you get later on to updating and enhancing it. It will have a suite of tests which will run all the time in the background. That way we'll build up a whole checklist of tests that it can run every single time. Okay, good. A concrete acceptance checklist. I'll encode it as a runnable smoke test, then run it. The one that needs care is check 3, missing source. I'll test it by temporarily renaming each real source, hitting the page, then restoring. So you see it's running some fairly comprehensive tests as a result of what I asked it to do. Okay, we can see there's a few failed tests. So So this is a very worthwhile activity that is covering. There's run some checks. Some of them are passed. That's looking good. All 12 checks pass. Here's the breakdown against your 3 criteria. I think that's pretty comprehensive in terms of the testing that we need to be doing at this stage at least. So that testing phase, it seems dull and boring, and it is. Any coder hates doing testing because it is so dull. But these large language models, they don't mind it's dull. Building a very comprehensive set of tests that it can run against every single time is the perfect use case for these large language models. In fact, there's even a methodology called test-driven development, TDD. That methodology actually says what you do is you design all of your tests first, and then you build the app so that it passes those tests. Just can't emphasize enough, especially if you want to maintain an app afterwards. So our very last step in the process is maintain. It's really important that you have a good suite of test cases. So remember, we did steps 1 to 3, and then 4, 5, and 6 were what we were doing now with the build and the test, getting everything all set up. We've got now an app that's working, albeit a very small one. But I just also wanted to spend a little bit of time on a particular approach which is getting a lot of attention in the AI world at the moment. It's called building in loops. It's very, very topical right now. There's a particular function your agent can actually use as well to build in those loops. And it's this function called loop. And what this does is it runs a prompt or a slash command on a recurring interval. So it has this continuous loop that is running. It makes sure that it won't stop that loop until the objective has been met. There's another version which is called /goal. And that's where you set a goal for Claude. It will check against that goal before stopping. You'll recall from session 2, that's what an agent does. Give it a goal. It runs in a loop and has various tools which it can call in those loops until that goal is met. You're probably then wondering, well, how is this particular command any different from just giving your agent a regular task, which it already does run in a loop? This goal objective has got a couple of little nuances. You use this goal objective when you've got something incredibly ambitious. With the way we've just built our app, we've built in these very, very small increments. That's how we chose to build. But you can also use this goal to give it a very, very large and ambitious project. What was happening when people were giving these agents very, very large and ambitious projects, there was 2 things happening. Number one, the project or the goal was so ambitious that it would use up all of its context window. Eventually, the context window would start degrading. It would not stick to the goal that was given because there was too much noise in the context window. And you'll remember that whole discussion we have about keeping our context window clean. One of the reasons why I deliberately broke things down into these small increments is because my context window was nice and clean and focused, and it would make sure that each one of those steps has been done very, very well. If you give it a big objective, that's one of the problems. The second problem was when you give it this very, very large and ambitious task, it would go around and around and around, and eventually it almost gets tired. That's the only way I can think of describing it. It gets so hyper-focused on, I need to meet this goal, and I'm not getting there. And so it gets to the point where it actually lies to you, and it says, yes, we're all done. And in fact, it's not done. And when people go back and look at it and say, no, you haven't done this, and so it hasn't met those objectives. And that's because they designed to meet that objective. They're getting so hyper-focused on the objective that it would just say, oh, I'm done. So those were the 2 things that were causing these agents to fall over when they were given very, very large and ambitious tasks. This goal function, it does 2 very interesting things. Number one is when it's gone through many, many loops, it gets to the point where its context window is filling up. And so it'll do very similar to what it does when it compacts. And it gets to a certain point and it makes an active decision to summarize where you've got to in the whole process. And it's slightly different from compact, but it's using this similar sort of approach. And at this time, it's basically saying, we've reached a certain point. I need to summarize where we've got to in terms of reaching that goal so that I can keep you focused on reaching that goal with a cleaner context window. And so it does that in the background. And then the second thing that it does to avoid it lying to you is it uses a second model. And so what the second model does is he says, what's the goal and have you achieved that goal? And it does it independently of the main agent. What it's doing is it's making sure that the main agent is not marking its own homework, and it's handing off that verification process of have I achieved the goal to an independent arbiter, which is another large language model call. Now, coming back to my agent, once I'd done that, I wanted to move to the deploy phase. What I did was I said the dashboard already lives in my notes repo, which is on GitHub, which we already know. Walk me through deploying it to Vercel. Connect the repo, set the root directory to the mission control folder, and deploy. This is the stage now where we've got something on our local computer, but I want to make it available to me when I'm not sitting at my machine. It then walked me through this process, and it came up with a couple of blockers, and one of these is very, very important. Blocker number one, which is privacy. A Vercel deployment serves a public URL with no authentication by default. This has got my to-do list, it's got my personal stuff, so I don't necessarily want to have that available to the public. I wanted to build the smallest possible version, so I told it, don't do authentication, don't do a login. This is where this one now turns up where we want to deploy, and this is a good check that Claude has done because it's got these safety measures built in. It's saying, do you really want to deploy this publicly? And so it's given me this blocker as part of its own built-in controls. The second blocker it gave me was saying that it wouldn't be able to work in a live environment. So if I was putting something live, then it wouldn't necessarily appear in the web page. But actually, I'm okay with that because if you recall, I've got this 30-minute update process. I'm quite happy with 30 minutes. It'll appear on my live dashboard, and I'm okay with that. That version of the blocker, I wasn't too worried about. I got to this point where about the authentication, and that's the part that I was a little bit worried about. What I said was, yes, add a simple app-level auth gate, so the dashboard is protected on any Vercel plan, because I'm on the hobby version of the plan, and it's saying that it was telling me that yes, you could get that password protection on Vercel, but you could only get that password protection on the paid version. I don't necessarily want to pay for the paid version, so what I've chosen to do is build the authentication inside of my app rather than using Vercel's authentication. Keep it minimal, a single shared password stored in an environment variable, not in the code or the repo. Check that via Next.js. So here's another important point, and Nathan, we've also talked about this before, this idea of an environment variable. So there's a very important file that you get that your agent will often build for you, and it's called the .env file. And env stands for environment file. The dot, if you'll remember, if the file has got a dot in front of it, it's a hidden file. So this .env file is the single file that stores all of your passwords or secrets or anything that you don't want your agent to see and anything that you don't want to be made publicly available, you store in this .env file. We're going to create this environment variable, which is your password, and we're going to store it in this .env.local file. And there's this other word here called getIgnored. And what this means is, although this file is being created as part of your project, and what that means is this file won't be sent to your GitHub repo. It's only going to be kept local. That's good practice because you don't necessarily want your passwords going up to GitHub. I know we created it as a private repo, which provides a certain amount of protection. To be even more certain, you don't want it to get to GitHub in the first place. If it's included in your gitignore file, it won't even leave your computer. This was the prompt that I gave it. It will then work with Vercel to get that set up, and it was ready for me to do the work that I needed to do on Vercel. I can't remember all of the steps, so I just said, can you remind me of all the steps I need to do in Vercel? It gave me a reminder. There's a prerequisite. The code is on GitHub. Our code is already on GitHub. I'm comfortable that my prerequisite was already met. So what it then did is said, you need to add a new project, and this project is, if you recall, our GitHub repo, for me it's called my Life Vault. So I needed to start a new project on Vercel. And so let me show you how I did that. So I went to Vercel and I've got a dashboard on Vercel, and you can see this button over here, add new. And so I add a new project, and I went to this new project, add new project, and then I need to pick a particular vault which I'm going to replicate. Remember our decision much earlier on the project? I said what we're going to do is we're going to put it in a repo, and that repo is on GitHub, and then we're going to point Vercel to that repo because Vercel is just going to pick up all of our files from that repo. What we need to do is we need to go to Vercel and tell it this is the repo you need to be pointed towards. If I come to my Vercel dashboard, I can look at my vault, and you can actually see I've got a number of them set up already, and I want to import a repo. Yeah, So I've got to look for my repo here in the search function because I'm connected to my GitHub repo. If I search for a particular repo, I could choose another repo. So I first need to configure the GitHub app. You've got to search for your repo, and then you've got to configure the GitHub app. If I click on configure GitHub app, it's going to open the GitHub app on my phone. I authorize Vercel to connect to my GitHub repo. It will show me that repo, and I will select that particular repo. And you can see here I selected my LifeVault repo. Once I've done that, I needed to do one more thing. I needed to add an environment variable. Once you go through that next step, you'll see select environment variable. I needed to select a password, and I needed to add this text here, dashboard underscore password, and that's the variable name. I type in my password. I've now given that environment variable to Vercel. And then I just click on deploy, and what it does then is it goes to my GitHub repo, pulls all of those files from my GitHub repo, and it deploys it on Vercel. I then verify that. Once I've verified that, I then come to Vercel, and if I look here at my dashboard, I'm going to come to my Vault dashboard. And so once I've deployed it, it will look like this. All I need to do then is it's been deployed, and I need to visit this site. There it is. You can see I'm on this page here, Mission Control ETA Open Vercel.app, and this is now publicly available. Well, it's not actually publicly available because it needs authentication. There we go. So I've gone to this web page, and it's asking me for my password, unlock, and there it is. There's my app. I can go to this on a external web page once I put my password in, and it's available to me wherever I go. There is another step which you could do. Of course, you could get your own domain name. Then you could go onto Vercel, and you could give your own domain name rather than the domain which Vercel has given us, which is this Mission Control ETA Open.vercel.app, which is not a particularly user-friendly name. You can just use your own domain name that you purchase. So that is the deploy phase of our project. We've now gone through the entire idea, design, build, test, and deploy. And the last phase is just the maintain phase, where as you then start thinking about new things that you want to build, you can then incrementally start adding to your app. Or if something breaks, of course, you can then go on and do those fixes, which is what you do in the maintain phase. So that is a full app built from beginning to end in 1 hour and 20 minutes. Good. So just the homework I want to leave you with. Number one, and do this first, do that memory upgrade. If you remember, I added that extra hook, the daily summary hook. So your agent writes a friendly summary into your daily folder. That's the data that your dashboard reads, and that's the warm up to building by directing. And I will have the recipe in the notes as we always do. Number two, I want you to write up one spec or PRD for something that you want to build. What's it for? What must it do? What is it not going to do? And I want you to build that muscle memory about building specifications or product requirements document. Number three, build the smallest possible version. Okay, whether that be like we've just done 3 panels, not 30, small steps, and then go through those loops to build it out incrementally. And you need to start smaller than you think. 4, only if you fancy it, try that loop or goal with something ambitious to see how that whole loop and goal process works. And that is a lot more ambitious, but if you want to try that, that's one thing that you should have a go at. Anything that breaks, of course, the usual thing, email me if it does, and of course we can have one-on-one sessions. That's the last time we're going to all be in the room as a course, but not the last time you'll see of me. I do want to do some sort of show and tell with people to see what you've built. Then you can walk me through, and then I can kind of give you feedback. I want to try and do that. The bigger thing, I think we've formed a little bit of a group here, so I want to try and see if we can build a little bit of a community around that where people can bounce ideas off one another and kind of share what they're building. So I'm going to try and set that up, and I'm going to find a way, a mechanism of doing that. There we go. 8 weeks ago, you'd never built anything with AI, or some of you built something maybe not as ambitious with AI, whereas today you've designed and built a real application or watched the machine build it in a loop, and we've put it live by directing and not by coding. The machine has got capable every single week. We've been adding more functionality, but it was never really about the machine. It's really about you knowing the shape of what you're building, so that when you point it at something that you like, it will do it in a way which you understand, and you understand what's happening under the hood. And that foundation is yours. Your agent, as you start building on it, will inherit more and more of that functionality, but you understand exactly how your agent works and how everything is being built. Thanks very much, everybody, for putting up with me for these 8 or 9 weeks, and hopefully you can go on and build something that's yours.